One, two, three, four.
Hello, you're listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast series. We are a general interest independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. This year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've had to close our store and cancel in-person events. But SKYLIT is your neighborhood bookstore, and we are finding ways to create community even while we're far apart. In the coming weeks, we'll be putting out lots of new audio content to help you discover new books, connect with authors, and check in with your favorite booksellers. To learn more about how you can help keep SKYLIT alive, please visit our website at skylitbooks.com or check out our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome back to SKYLIT. This is the SKYLIT Books podcast series. I'm your host, Maddie Gobbo, the events manager here at SKYLIT Books in Los Angeles. We're open every day these days for in-store shopping with a mask from 11 to 7 on weekdays and 10 to 8 on weekends. We also offer curbside pickup those same hours and online ordering on our website, skylitbooks.com. All right, so let's get to our conversation today. We're going to be discussing literatures of the Anthropocene with two authors, Sudeep Sen and Kiran Bhat. And we're delighted that they're joining us here today. So let me introduce them. Sudeep Sen is widely recognized as a major new generation voice in world literature and one of the finest English language poets in the international literary scene. His prize-winning books include Postmarked India, New and Selected Poems, Distracted Geographies, Rain, Aria, the HarperCollins Book of English Poetry, Fractals, New and Selected Poems, Erotext, and Kaifi Azmi poems. Blue Nude and The Whispering Anklets are forthcoming. He is the editorial director of ARC Arts and the editor of Atlas. Sen is the first Asian honored to read his poetry and deliver the Derek Walcott Lecture at the Nobel Laureate Festival. The Government of India's Ministry of Culture has awarded him the Senior Fellowship for Outstanding Persons in the Field of Culture and Literature. Kiran Bhat is a global citizen formed in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, to parents from southern Karnataka in India. He has currently traveled to over 130 countries, lived in 18 different places, and speaks 12 languages. He is primarily known as the author of We the Forsaken World, but he has authored books in 4 foreign languages and has had his writing published in the Kennan Review, the Brooklyn Rail, the Colorado Review, Eclectica, 3 AM Magazine, the Radical Art Review, the Chakar Mascara Literary Review, and several other places. His list of homes is vast, but his heart and spirit always remain in Mumbai somehow. He currently lives in Melbourne. You can find him at Weltgeist Kiran. Welcome to the podcast, gentlemen. I'm happy to have you. Thank you for being here.
It's been great to talk to you, Sudeep, over the last few weeks, few months. It's hard to tell now since COVID makes everything a blur, but I'm really interested in these poems, which I think tell us a lot about life in, a kind of a climate conscious world. Could you first start off by telling us what the word Anthropocene means? What is the Anthropocene?
Well, according to the dictionary meaning, it is obviously the age of great acceleration, the accelerated time of the way the world has changed due to climate change, man-made climate change, particularly. The human species has been around for 200,000 years, and the planet's age is about 4.5 billion years. And in 200,000 years, and especially the last, maybe 50, 100 years, we've done such a great job in destroying the planet. So that's really what it's all about, So that's what is, Anthropocene is just a geographical term for it, yes.
So why did you choose to title a book Anthropocene?
I think it's a very attractive word, which encompasses everything. And
Yeah.
why not? It's a one-word title which sort of, really maps everything. But the subtitle, of course, is Climate Change, Contagion, and Consolation. So I talk about the climate change aspect of it in the book. And then contagion is, of course, the pandemic. And a pandemic, I just feel, is one part of the effects of climate change. There are so many others which will happen eventually. And consolation, because I wanted the human element of the book, human element of our side, where how we are dealing with things. And I wanted to end the book at least with a sense of hope. Otherwise, without hope, it's all too dark and grim, really. So
Yeah.
that's how it's sort of structured in three parts, broadly speaking.
Yes, I mean, as someone who happened to read an early copy of the book, I can tell for people who will read it a little later, it's a really riveting book. I think that the poems on climate change are extremely emotional and heart-wrenching, and you really feel the state of the world through your poems. And it's also interesting, this idea of suffocation that's such a prominent part and kind of a theme that runs across all the poems in a certain way. Is there a particular reason why you relate to that theme more compared to, say, other aspects of climate change or other aspects of the COVID pandemic?
Oh, good question. Thank you. Thank you for your comments, and I'm glad you like it. And in fact, you're the only one, I think, who's read the manuscript, apart from my partner.
Oh, wow, amazing.
Yes.
Why is that special?
Yeah, as a whole book, yes. I mean, bits and pieces have, of course, been published here and there, so people have read many of the
Thank
pieces.
you. I'm honored that you trust
Yeah,
people.
it's one of those wonderful accidents, like this accident. I mean, look at you. You're in Australia. I'm sitting in India, and here we're doing a thing for America, Los Angeles. This is
Yeah.
just perfect. It's all these things are organic and wonderful. But suffocation is an interesting word because I realize more and more. I mean, here we are. The word, the the word, the two words, breathing and breath, are just so important in the cycle of living, of course, because without air we can't breathe. And then the entire dynamics about George Floyd, I can't breathe, racism, bad air, pollution. So the breathing as a metaphor has become so much more urgent than ever before. And of course, the Delhi pollution doesn't help. I mean, I'm asthmatic. I have breathing trouble anyway. And then I realize how precious air is. And of course, that's a very banal thing to say, but I've had sporting accidents before, and you're in great pain, and you think, God, that's really bad. But man, when you can't breathe properly, you feel, gosh, this is the end. And here we are again about mask and unmasking and nebulizing and cleaning and spraying and sanitizing. So it's all about that in some sense. It's all strangely come together. And let's put it this way, we are now formally wearing masks, but in all our social interactions, most people wear a mask, and it's only with very few people you unmask.
Yeah.
So there's that too, where you suffocate and where you choose not to suffocate and breathe and not breathe.
That's also a very interesting element to the book that I never even thought about. Was there an attempt that you wanted to unmask yourself in some way in these poems? Or like as
No,
a
not consciously, not at all.
yeah.
No.
Yeah.
As artists, we are constantly, using different tropes and so on. So
Yeah.
there was not a conscious way of not. I mean, I don't hide behind anything. I write with a sense of honesty and integrity, hopefully. And
It's interesting that you reflect a little bit on the end of times or the ecological scales of things. I think in my novel, We of the Forsaken World, I also wanted to reflect not necessarily on the end of times, but on this type of ravaging that's happening all across the world that happens in certain corners of our planet, but is usually ignored in a lot of topographies or like narratives of topography. We usually forget about these isolated tribes that are being destroyed by logging, or these middle of nowhere parts of the world that get destroyed by industrial spills or lost to corporate greed or kind of like overrun by conservatism and fundamentalisms. And of course, some of us live in those corners, so we think of it more, but the greater global narrative tends to forget about them, and people who live in like very lush, romanticized countries in the West usually are not even thinking about those problems unless they actively travel. So I wanted to kind of also not necessarily reflect on the Anthropocene, but reflect a little bit more on that kind of relation that we have to man and each other, and also do so in a way that this digital world, which allows people who are not even physically connected to themselves to kind of like allow them to communicate and collaborate in ways that we had never even witnessed before at this digital age. And so I wanted to write a book also that kind of allowed to create those cross cultural communications that I don't think are happening enough in the real world. So I
You know, I
certainly,
also,
yeah, tell me.
yeah, no, I also love the way you've titled the book. We of the Forsaken World, of course, is a wonderful title. But when you look at it typographically, it's all in lowercase. It's in italics, and then you have the three dots, the ellipse, and a question mark. Now that's a kind of a complicated title for a novel. Tell me more about it, because it's clearly very conscious.
Oh, wow, thank you, thank you. Well, first of all, the question mark might be incidental in something you've read. There's just 3 ellipses, but yeah, that everything else is on point. So the We of the Forsaken World is all lowercase because it's supposed to represent, so in We of the Forsaken World, I told the stories of 4 isolated regions that could be anywhere in the world, and I decided to create 16 different narratives that are just supposed to be also random citizens of these 4 very different places. And it was interesting to want to tell a story that actually was supposed to be hundreds of narratives, 64 different people in one of the best drafts. And I want to create the sense of a multitude speaking out and blurring together and trying to tell this greater collective tale of being kind of forgotten on the global landscape of narrative. And with this we, it's this we, like I'm a voice, this other person's a voice, this other person's a voice, and we're all coming together to tell this tale together. The lowercase is to indicate that commonality, that collectiveness, and also probably that we are lower in a certain way, but also not really. And then the ellipses is, and this is how our narrative continues. So this is like the start, we of the Forsaken World, and then the first person narratives begin, and that is that narrative of the we. So yes, it's very conscious.
And why do you want to tilt yourself as an italics?
Italics is just that's interesting. So that I think is, yeah, I didn't think about that. That's just how we use in English. We just italicize titles. So that is less conscious.
Okay.
That one
Because
was,
I read as a poet, one is so careful with language, as I thought there must be
that one was
everything.
just like we would italicize Anthropocene. That is just the italicis of English grammar, not nothing else.
All right, okay. Well, I clearly read too much into it. But I'm very surprised at your modesty. You just did what, 64? What did you say, 64?
60. Ultimately, it became 16 characters that made it to the book, but the best draft, it went from like a few hundred to 64 to 32 to 16. So it kept,
because I was hoping that it should be 108, considering in your bio you said you've lived in 108 places. So that would have been an interesting. And it also sort of ties up with the sort of Hindu sutra, isn't it? Those prayer beads. How many beads are there?
That's an interesting analysis. I never thought about sutras at all. So that's an interesting. I did think a lot about concepts of Atman, like in the sense of like, I do think a lot about in the spiritual way, how we're all just kind of pieces of string or connection to other spirits or other beings, and we're all part of this greater cosmic conversation that we kind of pass in and out in through our lives, and also through interactions with others. So that's something also that really heavily inspires my work, but not necessarily sutras. That's interesting, but yes. So,
and tell me more about Girar.
Well, I'm also working on a giant novel set all over the world that'll be taking place in 365 different places in the world, 365 for 1 year. And I wanted to tell the story of a mother and a father, an archetypal mother or father that could be anywhere, like that really, an extremely conservative mother, and then this kind of, this practical, hardworking father, just people who could be anywhere, and they're dealing with the difference it is an LGBT, very different son, and trying to mitigate this difference from the archetypal story level, like how learning over decades to accept that difference. And I want to channel that through all these different cultural corners of the world. So each installation of this greater constellation of pieces is going to eventually, over a decade, tell the story of that slow burn to acceptance, but each part of that story is taking place in another corner of the world, from Sydney to Santiago in Chile to Delhi to even like smaller villages in the middle of like the Falkland Islands or in the middle of Vanuatu or Turkmenistan. I wanted to literally turn, Hidar means to turn in Spanish. So I wanted to turn around the world as it turns around my parents as well. So it's also going to be a digital piece as much as it is a novel, because I want to stream it through a virtual platform, and so that people get stories as they're happening in real time. So if a story is being told in December 23rd, 2023, that's when the story would be taking place, and you will get it digitally. And then, so you're like there at the same time that I'm imagining mother and father in a certain way. That's a goal, at least.
Wonderful. Look
Yes.
forward to it.
I look forward to it. I think Anthropocene is also quite ambitious. I mean, it's a poetry collection, so it cannot be nearly, I mean, of course, but even poetry collections can be huge as well. So, you know, maybe you'll also someday write even a bigger book than Fractals or Anthropocene or all these other
No, never. I will never get into fiction. I think poetry is much bigger in scope, and you know,
Yeah.
even though things are microscopic, the macro element of poetry is you know,
Yeah.
far-reaching.
And
In a
you,
short space, you actually travel a
yeah.
lot more.
You
I'm
do.
not close to writing a book of fiction, of course, but you know, whenever I write short fiction, I realize, why am I wasting so many words? I can actually say it so tightly in a smaller space. And I have to say this, you know, most of my friends as novelists, and when I'm socializing with them and meet their agents, they all think that, you know, I have this great big fat novel, Indian novel. And I have to tell them that yes, I have a few more poetry collections you can look at, but there is no novel. Because one of the things I feel is, I know I can write two novels fairly well. One would be sort of a fictionalized version of my life. The second novel would be all the things I left out in the first book would get into the second book with some more fictionalized version of my life. Do I really have a third book in terms of a good book of fiction? I don't see that there is one, you know. So what's the point writing two really good, successful books when you don't have a third book as a novelist? That's my personal take, of course. Whereas with poetry, you know, it's a ceaseless pit, you know, because with every book I feel I'm learning something, I'm challenging myself, I'm doing something new. And Anthropocene in that sense is a sort of set, you know, another step towards that.
No, and I totally feel that, like, when I read your poetry, not just in Anthropocene but also in Fractals, you're actually, I think, definitely one of the best poets working right now, either from India or anywhere, because your ability to condense so much meaning and thought into a set of some lines is really staggering for me. Like, there were so many, when I read Anthropocene, there were so many of them that I really want to analyze and dissect and really get into, but you know, space is limited when one wants to write critically.
No,
But still,
but your short essay, I mean, see, that's the thing. I mean, you know, you wrote that lovely essay, and you had a word constraint, and in a sense, it was poetry because you got a lot in within that space. And of course, you know, you verbally told me that, you know, you really wanted to analyze, and it's frustrating because there's a lot in each piece.
I
But
know.
you know, there we are, because you know that's the thing. I mean, if the writing is working for each other, in that sense, I mean, you know, your work and my work for you, that's ultimately what we want to do, isn't it? The writing itself should speak to the reader, and
Yeah.
if it's doing so with gravitas, with meaning, with lyricism, and some emotionality, I think one is on the right track.
Yes, and I think what's also interesting in both of our works is not just that we, I mean, at least I don't want to speak for myself, but definitely you write with that gravitas and meaning. I mean, I think that the other thing is that we're writing about things that are topical and deserve greater global critical attention because we want to write about, like, I think that we are talking about something that does affect people on a global scale. Like, do you feel like there are a lot of authors or contemporaries who are interested in anthropocenic literature? Like, are there other writers you think that are in this conversation as well?
So in the last 7-8 months, I think by virtue of what we are going through, the kind of world we are living in, people as writers are responding to this topic. Yes. Prior to that, I'm not very sure. Prior to that, it would have been sort of oblique. You know, people wrote on these topics, you know, not in a kind of a focused manner. But now, yes, I mean, because it's very much, you know, the topic of our times.
It is, and it's something that I think a lot of us have to think about because we witness ecological degradation right in front of us. I mean, there was that wonderful poem written by that person from the Solomon Islands. She recited it in front of the UN, I think in 2014 or 2013, just talking about how the Marshall's Islands were disintegrating right in front of her. And, you know, Vinita Agrawal, who's also, I think, a Mumbai-based poet, she created this wonderful anthology called Open Your Eyes, which you're also a part of, in which people all over the world, but largely out of India, were talking about climate change and how it was affecting things in front of them, as well as ecological degradation. So I think that there's definitely
There's another very, very good anthology that's come out from Penguin Random House. I don't know whether you've seen it. It's called Singing in the Dark.
I've not heard of it. Oh yes, I have seen this. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Someone else I know is in that. I don't remember who right now, but I have to.
Big fat book. This is actually really a global anthology on poetry under lockdown.
Yeah.
India.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that's happening. You know, people are talking about it. I mean, the thing is, of course, whether people in the future in a sustained way will continue engaging in this topic. Only then we will know whether there's a sort of movement or interest. Right now, it's very much a topical thing. Just like, you know, if there's floods or if there's a political situation, people write about it. So it's too early to say. But hopefully, I think because it's such an urgent issue, I mean, you know, climate change is staring at us and people are still not taking it seriously. I mean, look at the last administration in the US. I mean, the man on top, you know, denied that there's something called.
Oh, it's ridiculous. Thank God that man on top is changing. But that's another topic for another story.
January, he's going to hang on to Jan 20th. You know, he's not going to leave the White House that's easily. But that's a separate issue. But people have written. Amitav Ghosh has written a wonderful book on climate change, the Great Derangement. Many social scientists are writing. So yes, there's a growing literature, and there's this whole subgenre, what is called eco-literature. You know,
yes. Can you explain what is eco-literature, just for the people who might not know much about it?
Well, you know, I'm not an academic. You know, I leave it to the sort of the greats and the goods in the academia to sort of make these fancy terms. But I suspect what they mean is literature which deals with ecology or the ecosystem, and so therefore geography and the climate and so on, very broadly speaking. But I also feel it is probably, and this is how I think as a poet, that it sort of extends in a micro way too inwardly. What about the geography and the terrain and the climate change within our body that's being affected?
And that's something interesting.
Because of the outside. So I would hope that is also part of eco-literature at some point.
Yeah, can you explain that more, like what it means to write eco-literatures of the bodies that are visceral and physical, not just ecological? Can you explain that more?
What is our body? Our body is an interface between the outside and the inside world.
Yeah.
The outside world is what we are talking about, ecology, so to speak. So the air, the water, the rains, the floods, and everything is in the outside world. But we need all that to survive. So we are breathing it in. Again, breath, we are breathing all that in. And that breath, if it is polluted or if it is contaminated, affects the inner breath structure and the inner part of our body, functioning of our body. Similarly, with what we ingest, so the kinds of food we are eating, whether it's modified food or artificial food, or whether it's sort of organic food. That's why our health has changed so much and body shapes have changed so much, because so much of it is modified processed food in daily life if you're not very careful. So yes, it's the inside and the outside, the ecology inside and the outside. It's always very linked. I remember when I was very, very young, I used to watch this wonderful series by this American scientist. I wouldn't say pop scientist. I mean, a scientist called Carl Sagan. But he did these fantastic series, just like Richard Attenborough did these wildlife series. So his area of interest was the cosmos. So I was completely fascinated. I'm in school, not even high school. So it's a time when you're sort of interested in spacecraft and rocket and the universe and the solar system. And I used to watch all the series. At that time, we didn't even have a TV in our house. So I used to go to the American Center Library. And since this is a program for America, they might be interested. So the American Center Library in Delhi and the British Council Libraries, library were two really good libraries when I was growing up in Delhi. And they were the only two, once you have membership, which was very cheap if you're a student, it was very cheap. The two places in Delhi which were air conditioned. So we would go and hang there because it's just so hot and most places didn't have air conditioning. So, part of being in those libraries was that. But also they used to screen fantastic documentaries and, art films and so on. So in the British Council, for instance, I saw most of the Shakespeare plays which were on film. So this series was being screened at the American Center, and I would go there. I would be like one of, there were 3 people in the entire auditorium. I was so obsessed with the series. But 2 of them, what he did was he went from the cosmos and then mapped it inversely and took the spacecraft, the notional spacecraft, inside the body, and then he was swimming through the bloodstream, the corpuscles, so the complete inside of the body became fascinating on screen. So it was amazing. So that was another good example of what the inside and outside are. And I mean, what is it? Ultimately, our overall life patterns and models, scientific models, are very similar. It's all to do with an atom, with the proton, neutron, and electron. Whether it's this little cell in our body which makes up our body system, or is it a solar system, we are operating on the same principle.
And we're operating in a certain oneness. I mean, that's also something that interests me a lot. I mean, that idea of going from atom to molecule to all the different things in our bodies, to this body, to this, to this town, to the city, to this nation, to this earth. I mean, I'm not going to the universe, although I also am interested in the universe in certain ways, but I do find it interesting how we can stagger all these little parts, all these little atoms of ourselves onto this interface that is the world, planet Earth, and to kind of map out the topographies of a selfhood onto a kind of a global interface. So, I mean, yeah, it's interesting for sure. And I think that also this idea of eco-literature, this idea of, I mean, it need not only be necessarily directly derivative of climate change or response to like ecological problems. It's also an awareness of ecology, an awareness of our limited space in this earth, and the fact that we're part of a greater connection and interface. So I relate to that.
You're absolutely right. Yes. And before climate change became trendy and topical, eco-literature still existed, you see, so like many other things. So it's very much part of a larger space, I think, yeah. And many of these subgenres, of course, overlap. We're talking about body politics, eco-literature.
Globalization as well.
Globalization, yes, of course, yeah.
How do you feel that globalization plays into this kind of new interest in eco-fiction or eco-literature or literatures of the Anthropocene?
Well, it's a very logical extension, isn't it? I mean, because of globalization, we are facing so many problems. Otherwise,
we had so many problems. We finally realized that they affect us all, not just one little town, city.
Globalization was not meant for the entire globe. That's the irony.
I know.
The Americans and the British people and this Western world think of globalization as, a global phenomenon. We never thought of this as a globalized phenomenon. It was purely because it helped their trade systems. Why do you think they produce things in India and ship it back? Because labor is cheap. They're not doing us any service. Similarly, America is not interested in immigrants. Only if the immigrant is useful to America, then they'll let them in. So Silicon Valley and the doctors, they're just, so there's even a hierarchical preferential way of immigration there. So let's not forget, globalization is completely rooted to money and the stock market and so
I should be more precise.
Otherwise, all around the world, we had these microsystems happily coexisting. It was so
rather than globalization, there's also this narrative of like planetary coexistence. Maybe that's a better word to say, to be aware of all these other cultures living in the systemic spaces, and then that there's kind of this shared, there's not necessarily a universality, but maybe a shared kind of humanity and a shared kind of set of things.
Yeah, no, I would like to believe in what you're saying. And, we probably partly also come from the same ethos, being Indians at one level. We, of course, Indian American.
Yeah. I understand where you're coming from.
Another layer to it. And, I've lived in America and England for
Yeah.
many, many years to know what that side is.
Yeah.
But, I want to sort of remind you that this whole notion of coexistence is, I don't know how serious people are. And planetary coexistence, again, why do you think people want to conquer the other planets? Because resources here are getting more and more difficult. So the superpowers then go and find out, they want to stake claim in the planets outside. That's really what is happening. So it's a larger malaise of what has happened in the past, and it's part of history, part of the way things work.
So maybe the solution then, what are you arguing then is the solution in this context? To not act, to not try to connect, or to not try, I mean, we're talking about several different things as well. I mean, you're very much talking about economic globalization, which is kind of the the side consequence of colonialism and a lot of other like different trade aspects. And yes, like space colonialization is also going to become a form of that, but there's also just like interconnectivity and just like learning more about sharing through the internet, through kind of shared human consequence as well, like this kind of earth we live on. And so I'm more thinking about it from that perspective, not from the economic one, whereas I think you're thinking of it more from that, like that.
Yeah, so I was talking about the economic side first, but really
it's also part of that.
Yeah, it is also part of that. But when you ask me what the solution is, I mean, I as an individual have certain suggestions. I don't have solutions. But fortunately, at least we inhabit a space where we can make a difference in a different kind of way. We inhabit the artistic space. We are writers, there are colleagues of mine who are photographers, musicians. These are the people who will be driving the change, because it's the soft power, the soft signals through creativity and slow reading that people will start sort of, again, I think, hopefully start reimagining things. I mean, the pandemic and the lockdown has slowed people down, and people actually are grateful about the fact that they actually speak to more people, albeit virtually right now. They have more time to read, they have more time to reflect. We were just hurtling on and on and on and on. So, it's like a reset button. It's to say, check again. So, I think the artistic community has a lot of a big role to play.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that I also deeply believe in, is that power of imagining, that if you are not necessarily happy with the narratives that are coming forward, then why not take advantage of being an artist to use your imagination and create other narratives and other options for a narrative. And in the space that I work in is that realm of kind of global thinking, kind of living in a more collective environment and a conscientious one of all the different cultures and mindsets of this planet. But I mean, and that's a part of this kind of ecological protest that we have to shape as well, is to start to now try to reharmonize people towards realizing that there are all these other parts of the world, and they also deserve your attention and your understanding. So all we can do is hope to create, and create well enough that people pay attention to it.
Of course. Well, I mean, let's hope the darkness is lifted. Yes. But I always look at things positively. I mean, look at it. Every morning the sun comes out. The sun doesn't complain. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
The larger forces in life continue.
Yeah.
It's just, we as humans are so angst-ridden.
Yeah.
So just look at the birds and the leaves outside, and there'll be a smile on your face.
I also believe that. Yeah. I agree with you. I think we just have to learn to, ironically, we say reimagine, but that also means we have to kind of maybe start putting ourselves in that third perspective of another creature.
But Kiran, the other thing is, I think you're coming more from a perspective of a Western society, because that's where you largely inhabit.
Yeah.
I'm coming from India, where both the Indianness and the Western society coexist.
Yeah.
So I'm not very far removed from, I would say, the soil in some sense.
Well,
It's much more.
but even that, I think, is not about Western or Indian, like anything. I mean, there are people who live in Kansas or live in the middle of Australia, and they work on the soil every single day, and they would also have that closeness. So I think that
True.
you would
But
have to look.
then you're talking about the number of people. I mean, the number of people, say, in certain parts of the world, Africa, Asia, and so
Yeah,
on, just the number of people clustered together at a very basic level, on the soil level, is much higher, and the
that's
hardships
true.
are
Yes,
higher.
I mean, yes, that's
You
also
know,
another
I
thing.
mean, in a prairie farm, with a huge machine, the man is, of course, working in the soil, but
That's true.
he and 3 other people are working, and they have high broadband internet there. That it's not like with
But it
like
depends on again, that depends on the society, and I don't think you can generalize either. I mean, there are certain societies where, I mean, but that would also again depend on. I mean, people like us who live in urban environments are not working the soil, doing anything more than any other individual. So ultimately,
absolutely, yeah,
it comes to
absolutely,
the element of acumen and just that desire to connect and try to kind of perceive things. But yeah.
yeah.
Well, Sudeep, we're now at the end of our time. I want to thank you so much for doing this. I'm really grateful that I've gotten a chance to talk to a poet as illustrious as yourself, and I've learned a lot reading your poetry, and I look forward to continuing this literary dialogue outside of Skylight Books. Now, we have a little bit of extra time, and I'm sure that after all this talking, a lot of these curious readers are interested in what we say as writers. So, would you have maybe a poem or two to share? We'd love to hear them.
So this is a poem called Disembodied, which of course I read, I think, last time, or
Yeah,
maybe I didn't read this one. But so this is directly to do with Anthropocene, climate change,
yes,
but very much from the point of view of my city, Delhi. This is where
yeah,
it's based. Disembodied. My body carved from abandoned bricks of a ruined temple, from minaret shards of an old mosque, from slate remnants of a medieval church apse, from soil tilled by my ancestors. My bones don't fit together correctly as they should. The searing ultraviolet light from aurora borealis patches and etch corrects my orientation. Magnetic pulses prove potent. My flesh sculpted from the fruits of the tropics, blood from coconut water, skin colored by brown bark of Indian teak. My lungs fueled by Delhi's insidious toxic air, echo asthmatic sounds, a new vinyl dub remix. Our universe where radiation germinates from human follies, where contamination persists from mistrust, where pleasures of sex are merely a sport, where everything is ambition, everything is desire, everything is nothing, nothing and everything. White light everywhere, but no one can recognize its hue. No one knows that there is color in it, all possible colors. Body worshipped not for its blessings, but its contour, artificial shape shaped by Nautilus, skin moistened by L'Oreal and not by season's first rains, skeleton strength shaped by earthquakes or slow molded by fearless forest fires. Ice caps are rapidly melting, too fast to arrest glacial slide. In the near future, there will be no water left, or too much water that is undrinkable, excess water that will drown us all. Disembodied floats afloat like Noah's Ark. No GPS, no pole star navigation, no fossil fuel to burn away, just maps with empty grids and names of places that might exist. Already, there is too much traffic on the road. Unpeopled hollow metal shells without brakes swerve about, directionless, looking for an elusive compass.
Thank you for that wonderful reading, Sudeep. And I think that thematically I want to read something from We of the Forsaken World. It's not a poem, but I think it also plays with kind of that feeling of loss. I am hungry, but only for the turtle meat of our clan. I've wandered many a moon to reach the land of the thatched people, as I have traversed many falls and rise of the sun to return to ours. Do not be lonely, do not talk to the spirits alone. I want nothing more than to see you. I want to eat from the berries together, as we do every half moon. I will be home soon. I was running again. I tapped my hands against the trees around me. The bark of the finger tree was coarse but soft, while the drum tree was battered but rough. Those bushes with thorns, those I did not touch. I spied the tree trunk, the width of 1 man, the height of 100, the branches that flamed in all the directions at once, the type my family had lived in, far north of here. They are here! They are here! I thank the spirits that the trees are here. The land of the thatched man is a land without trees. Or rather, the land I discovered was a land without trees. A land where the bodies of the red trees were nothing but stumps. Could it have been the plotting of the great cats or the monkeys? Not at all. But why would they tear down the red trees? This is another thing about them that I do not know. So this is just a small little section of some story in the middle of the nomadic tribe that has, the nameless tribe, the one that's in the middle of the jungle, and it's just one of the warriors reacting to the land after it's been cut down. So I think that it ties in a little bit with this kind of thing we're talking about how humans are connected to the land, and as we, as maybe more modern or contemporary human beings, tear it down for our own greed, we also kind of cause a lot of harm. Do you have another poem possibly to share, Sudeep?
Yes, maybe a short poem. This one is called Hope. I think and this is called Hope Light Leads. And I wrote this poem at about 3 at night. When the room was dark, and the light from the bathroom was escaping to the edge of the door, and just the sort of sides of the door was creating this thin sliver of light and shape. But of course, it talks about various other things. Hope, light leaks. Late at night, light leaks, spilling beyond the door's rectangle edge, a cleaving shift, its shape, a partial crucifix, a new resurrection. Light's plane waxes, wanes, viral load expands, contracts. Lives matter in this blackness. There shall be light after the darkness.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.
I see